Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to have Shae on today. Shae Cox, who is a wonderful coach of parents and an aware parenting instructor. I'll let her introduce herself. But Shae's going to focus on sleep and the importance of connection. And sleep is one of the biggest challenges that parents really struggle with. And I've had Shae present to some of my other families, and she's absolutely wonderful. So thank you, my darling. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'd love to be able to share my knowledge with everyone today. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to come along and be part of the summit.
My pleasure. Why don't you introduce yourself, Shae?
Hi, I'm Shae Cox. I'm the founder of the Connection Village, and I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the Parenting Summit. I'm a holistic infant and child sleep consultant and conscious parenting coach. And I founded the Connection Village as I wanted to help create happy families, empowered parents, and connected children. So today I've been invited along to talk about sleep and the importance of connection. So I believe that there are several key sleep elements that children need to achieve to have optimal sleep ability. So some of those are sleep science, emotional regulation, adequate nutrition, support of development and their milestones and different transitions, and having safety and security within their environment. So I wanted to just highlight today that if we have any one of these key elements perfect, like the sleep science is perfect, but our children are carrying emotional baggage and haven't offloaded stress and tension, they're not going to be able to sleep to their best of their abilities. So it's really important that we meet the needs of our children across all of these key sleep elements to achieve optimal sleep. So I'm going to go through and highlight some of the key elements as we go along, and just explain why they're important through the process of sleep, and also how they marry together to make sure that we can achieve that optimal sleep ability. So firstly, as far as the sleep science, you've probably heard phrases go around like sleep cycles and wake windows, and building enough sleep pressure and ensuring our children aren't overtired or undertired. Obviously, all of these things are really important as far as we need to be following an age-appropriate routine. And I think it's probably of utmost importance that we have realistic sleep expectations for our kids. So with the focus of going from children of, starting from newborn all the way through to sort of 5, 6, 7, obviously their sleep maturity changes over that time. And so I think it's remiss of us, and I do a lot of prenatal education, and one of the biggest fears is sleep deprivation and how are we going to, get through the nights, and I'm not going to be able to function. And I think it's just going into it with a realistic expectation of what that's going to look like. And so it's setting those expectations, being aware of what children do, how they develop, how their sleep cycles work, having a basic guide of how long to keep them up, what we can do during wake times, and how we ensure that we don't have that sort of pressure of overtiredness and the resistance leading into sleep. But just as important are the sleep cycles and wake windows and things like that, well, I think actually probably more important is our children's sleep cues and what our children are trying to tell us. So I've highlighted here a couple of early sleep cues, things like red eyebrows, turning away, being a bit disinterested, and then some late cues, things like, hysterical crying or back arches, or, off-track behaviour sometimes in older children when they just sort of get to that tantrum stage and they're just, you can't bring them around. If we're waiting at that stage and we're sort of not looking out and reading their cues of what their actual behaviour or their cues are trying to tell us, it's sort of remiss of us to work to the wake window. Often by observing our children and being guided by those sort of timings for what the routine should or can look like, we can sort of pick up on those earlier cues, and we can allow time for the settling, and we can also take into account what our actual child's sleep maturity is. often I have people, especially in that younger sort of newborn to 6-month period, that are like, I'm working to exactly the right, sleep wake windows, and my child's really overtired, and or they're still resisting sleep, and I'm doing all the things right to get their sleep pressure right and all of that. But what they're not taking into account is what their actual child's sleep ability is, what their child's sleep maturity is. So they could be working off wake windows that are suitable for a 6-month-old because their child's 6 months, but often their child might not have the ability, or isn't linking cycles yet, or isn't able to achieve a self-settle, or needs more support, might need to do close contact naps and things like that to help to build that safety and security. And that's where it comes into play with, yes, we can have the sleep science perfect, but that doesn't mean that our child is necessarily going to be able to rest and fall off to sleep peacefully without these other sort of key sleep elements.
Can I just ask a question there, Shae?
Yeah, sure.
I really love your referring to, the sleep science gives us a bit of a framework, a bit of an understanding of all the different elements of what promotes good sleep in our children, and wake windows and things. But that understanding of being able to read your baby and recognise that babies don't fit into those structures. They're there to give us that information, to understand certain aspects of sleep, but not necessarily to be the guide for our baby. The baby's actually the guide. That's what you're saying.
Baby, right, 100%. So I think it's about using those sort of sleep-wake windows or sort of age-appropriate routines as a guide, and then the observation of your child and where your child's actually at. As you've probably be aware of, we can't compare any two children, let alone siblings, let alone another mum in our mother's group or another child that's 6 months old, because we're all progressing at different stages. And so if we're following only sort of wake windows alone, or working to sleep cycles and making sure we're doing self-settles and they've got the environment perfect, all of those things can be perfect, but if they're not actually following the cues of their baby, they may be keeping them up too long, not long enough. And it's how we prepare. Some babies might take 20 minutes to settle, with a cuddle and pats and singing, and another baby might take 5 minutes to settle with it. So we've got to sort of start to look out for what are those things to set them up for that optimal sleep, and what do we need to do in the lead up to sleep to sort of give them the best chance of success of being able to go off to sleep.
Can I just make a comment there? I think one of the biggest expectations parents can have is they're aware that newborns will wake a lot and need to feed a lot, and then they start to find a little bit of a rhythm, and then the rhythm changes and it might feel like it's going backwards, and we think and assume that wake windows and that process of really aligning with sleep pressure and circadian rhythms and things is a linear thing, and it gets better and better and better, when in actual fact it's nowhere near linear, because depending on the development of that child will depend on what their needs are in that given moment, will be based 100%. On their growth and who
100%. And that's why I think you often hear the things like, oh, they're going through the 4-month sleep regression, often people call it. Yeah. Actually a progression, because it's a progression in their development, it's a progression in their maturity, their sleep cycles are changing and maturing, they're spending more time often in a sort of deeper stage of sleep, so they don't have to work as hard for linking of cycles. They may be beginning to roll, so they've got impact of a developmental milestone also that needs to be supported. And they're sort of, I suppose, progressing out of that real sort of newborn stage, waking up, becoming a bit more interactive and those sorts of things. So that's what I was saying. If we could have the sleep science perfect, but as soon as they change, we've got to change with them, and we've got to follow their lead and be looking out for their cues and what they're trying to tell us, to understand what's actually, what is the need that isn't being met, or what do we need to do to ensure those needs are met to set them up for the best success.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So, and that is in line with, like I was saying, with those sort of key sleep elements. If we have all of the sleep perfect as far as the sleep science, and we've changed the timings to suit the age and stage, and, they're all ready to go into sleep, and then you get into the room and, things all turn south, and they, either become really alert, or they, the tears come or whatever. So then it's looking at, okay, well, what do we need to sort of do to look behind what is this sort of behavior trying to tell us? Is that trying to tell us they're overtired, or is it an invitation from them to say, I need more connection with you, I need a bit of an extra cuddle, I need to do more practice with my rolling in that wake time, and looking at the sort of from a more holistic approach, because our children are constantly sending us invitations for connection, but often we miss them because we're so focused on, getting them to sleep and how, the timings and making sure that they've, done all those things right. And we've gone into the room and we've put the sleeping bag on and we've got the white noise and we've drawn the blinds and we've done all these positive, positive sleep cues. And then we're getting met with resistance. And that resistance is often actually them trying to sort of invite us to be able to do a bit of listening, to hold the space for them to be able to offload stress and tension that hasn't necessarily been offloaded during the wake time. Or they might be carrying sort of accumulated feelings that they need to offload. And we need to trust the process that they intrinsically know how to offload any of those feelings. And we've got to follow their lead to be able to support them in that. And that looks different again at different ages. So in a sort of a child that's, say, at that 4-month age that's trying to learn how to roll and things like that, they may be carrying frustration that they can't, roll from front to back. They can only roll back to front, or, they might be getting frustrated during that developmental playtime in the wake window, but it's not necessarily released at the time that the play was happening. So they might be having a cry at bedtime. Or it might be in an older child when you're trying to, get their pajamas on and get them into bed, and they're trying to run off down the hallway and they're like, I don't want to do that, I want to play chasey, or, come on, mum, and they're inviting you into the play because they know that they still have feelings there that they need to offload. Or it might be a child, an older child, 5 or 6, that's trying to, I need another drink, or I need to go to the toilet, or jumping on the bed, when you go in to settle them and you want to read a book. And we often fight against their natural process to eliminate those feelings by going, come on, it's time for sleep time, lie down, I'll read you a book, I'll rub your head, I'll sing you a song. And they're like, that isn't what I need. I need to move my body, I need to do the jumping, I need to, so we're often fighting against that, their natural processes, to be able to help them to relax.
Very interesting. And so just coming back to babies, though, because they're very tricky to read emotional cues, what does holding space for a baby who are crying is so wired to trigger the parent's desire to fix and to stop? And we can get very fixated on, I'm doing something wrong, and padding and doing our best to settle. Can you just describe in detail what it is to just hold space for a baby to release like that?
So I think it's one part of that is knowing your capacity to be able to hold the space. That's really important, because sort of we can go into it thinking that we're going to be able to, but often when our children cry, we do have that natural, I've got to fix the problem, I can't do this, and we're doing the jiggling and we're doing the putting the dummy in and all of those sorts of things to try and stop the crying. Now, the crying is actually their natural way of either trying to communicate a need that hasn't been met, and maybe a physical need, and or an emotional need. So they may need to offload stress or tension. So if we've sort of worked through those primary needs, are they hot, are they cold, are they hungry, are they, have they got a dirty bottom, and we've sort of addressed all those, we know the environment is good, and we've done the sort of, I suppose I call it, done the work during our wake time, we've done the play, we've done all those sorts of things. It may just be that they just need us to listen to the tears. Because the tears are actually their way of offloading. They can't say, oh, I'm frustrated because I tried to roll from front to back and I couldn't do it. They can't articulate. So their way of offloading that stress, tension, or frustration is through the tears. So to be able to hold the space is, I suppose, showing the empathy and compassion and saying, I can hear you, darling. I can see that you're frustrated, or I can see you've got some big feelings. I'm here and I'm listening, and not trying to fix, not trying to jiggle it out of them, not trying to shove put a dummy in their mouth, and things like, using a dummy, and not that it's not okay to use a dummy in some cases, but we've got to make sure that if we are using things like that, that we're using them in the right ways and we're not shoving feelings down with them. So if we've gone through, we've had that sort of ability, we've done some listening, but then it comes down to our capacity for how long we can do the listening for.
Yeah. Would you be looking at your baby in the eyes at that time? Or would you have
I would. I think so. Yeah. So I think it's about the connection and showing your loving presence in that moment. I'm here, I'm listening, I can see you, I can see you've got some big feelings, bring them out. I'm here and I can, I can help, and I'm present and I'm with you in this process. So it sets up that sense of trust. If they need you, you will come, and that you're always open to the listening. And this is sort of, I suppose, the framework for those, your parenting years, for having that in any stage. You can come to me, you can bring it, I'll listen, I'll hear you, and it's not often about fixing the problem, it's just holding that sort of space for them to be able to offload those stresses and tensions and stress. And as we sort of incorporate more play and use our wait times to do that, then that also helps with not having to sort of have as much stress or pressure to release in those moments of sleep. So which is what I was sort of alluding to with this slide, as far as going from how we use play and how we capitalize on those wait times to ensure that those needs are met and they have the opportunity to do that emotional regulation and release that stress and tension and pressure and learn. You've probably heard the saying, play is the work of children, and it really is, because play is the way that they learn. Play is the way that they connect and build that beautiful attachment with their caregivers and, build relationships. And it's also the way that they emotionally regulate. So they're often, as I said, they're always inviting us into their play, come and play with me. And with babies, it's observing when they are, on their play mat, the sort of things that they're choosing to play with, how they're sort of developing over the time, when they realise that their hands are theirs, and as they start to progress in development, things like that, supporting that development through different play that we do to ensure that they're practicing often to try and master those skills, and also giving them the chance and holding the space for them to release the associated frustration with not being able to do as much as their little minds are telling them. Their physical bodies may not be able to do what their mind is, telling them to do.
Beautiful. Yeah. Tell me more about what play looks like for a young baby.
So depending obviously on the age of the baby, but it's very much around that building of the connection. So any chance that you get, I mean, in the early years, even just having your eye contact and things while you're feeding, talking to them, when you're changing nappy, doing a little raspberry on their tummy, or doing, I call them bicycle legs, like biking their legs around, anything like that, that's just the sense of touch and connection, creating the eye contact, and just letting them sort of know that they're seen and they're heard, talking to them, just our voice, and they're seeing life through an emotional lens. So they're constantly interpreting our facial expression, our tone of voice, singing songs, doing all of that. And then it goes into obviously your tummy time, and then progressing with different developmental play and things as they progress in their ability. And then we get to the stage like this little fella who was one of my clients, who had just started to learn to walk, and they sent me this video. They were out on the field learning to walk, and I'd given them a bit of instruction as to try and progress his development as much as possible, do the practice, start to incorporate some more bigger motor skills like kicking balls and things. And they sent me this video. He'd only been walking for about 2 weeks, and they went out and did this. And then after this beautiful play session, I got a message to say that, we obviously exhausted him, and he had a chance to do that real practice his skills, and he went in and had a 2-hour nap after that. So it's things like that, it sort of further cements those importance of having that time to play and connect and give them the opportunity to lead the play. That's something that's really important, because we don't want to, I suppose, power over and take over the play and say, oh no, you don't do it like this, you do it like this. It's giving them, I suppose, providing the vehicle for them to be able to sort of work things out for themselves and invite us in how they want us to be included in the play, as opposed to vice versa.
I love that video, Shae. The delight
Yes.
in kicking the ball
Yeah.
and then coming straight back to the parent to say, look what I've
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah. And I think that's another thing. I think, when we see our children doing something or focusing something or learning a new skill, it's really, I suppose, pumping up the tires and telling them how amazing they are and all of that, because they are constantly looking for that sort of reassurance and that they're pleasing us, and they want to, they want us to be involved. And that's how they sort of, I suppose, helps them to relax, because they know that we're watching and we can see what they're doing. So it makes them feel sort of really proud of themselves, which is super cute. So in, I suppose, relation to sleep, and after we've sort of had those periods of play with, during our wake times, whether it be in young babies in between nap times, or whether it be in older children that may have gone off to kinder or childcare or school, it's how we sort of use that time in the afternoons when they get home from school to help them to offload any of the stress and tension that hasn't been offloaded. So you may have sort of, I suppose, heard of that broken cookie analogy. You give your child the wrong cup when you do afternoon snack or something, and the whole world has changed, and that is just not okay. And we've got tears and we've got tantrums, and I don't want the yellow cup, I wanted the pink cup or whatever. And that's just their way of expressing any of those sort of built up emotions. It's often nothing to do with the color cup they've got. That was just sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. So then it's uncovering, again, holding the space for that, those big feelings to come up and surface. And then they've often got by that older age, they've got the ability to be able to articulate, but they need to sort of, I suppose, I call it clear the fog. So they need to release the stress and tension to be able to think clearly, to actually be able to have that connection with us, to be able to tell us what the actual problem is.
Yes.
So I had an example of this today. My son had been to like a sports camp, and he was all very sheepish and quite sad and angry when he got home. And we had a little play, and I'm, just waiting for the balloon to pop, and waiting for the tantrum, or waiting for, to see to uncover what had actually happened. And just by creating that closeness with him through the play, we had a bit of a play wrestle, and, I just sort of, got in close with him and snuggled in and said, I want to hear about your day. And then it wasn't until we had that sort of closeness and connection that he could tell me that he had been sort of bullied, and the kids didn't want him to be included in the game that they were playing, and someone threw a ball at his head, and another kid stole his hat, and things like that. So then you can sort of work through and, how that made you feel, and and empathize and say, I can see why you're feeling a bit sad this afternoon, mate. That was a big day for you. And, just provide that comfort and safety. But if that wasn't offloaded then we would have had that sort of offload when, we were leading into bedtime tonight, and I would have been wondering why he wouldn't settle, and why, he needed me to be close. And then it probably would have come out, during a head rub time, or, he would have been playing up and resisting sleep because he would have been still carrying that stress and tension from his day.
It can be very, that's a beautiful example, and so relevant. Like this model of supporting our children to feel their feelings and work through their feelings starts at the very beginning, but it's so true for adulthood as well. Now, as busy parents who, potentially, working full time, picking children up from daycare, like that need to reconnect with their children in order to then set up that sort of bedtime routine, and the parent doesn't have much in the tank. Like, what about parent resistance? What do you say to parents who just say, look, I just want my baby to go to bed, or I want my child to go to sleep, I've got nothing else to give them?
Yeah.
How would you
So I think it does come back to sort of, I suppose, working out what you're sort of doing an assessment of yourself, and finding out what your capacity is for the play, and what your capacity is for holding the space to be able to listen to those tears. So you might sort of go, I haven't got much in me today. It's going to have to keep it really simple. But even little simple things, if we can do things like, you might do a quick running race from the car as you're coming in from childcare, or you might, pick up their shoes and just sort of meet them with a bit of silliness and go, oh, these are so stinky. You must have, done lots of running at childcare today, or just something to try and encourage that sort of laughter and fun. It doesn't have to be, I think parents sort of, I suppose, get overwhelmed with the thought, I'm going to have to play for, 30 minutes, or I'm going to have to, and I don't have 30 minutes in me, I've got 5 minutes in me. Well, if you've got 5 minutes in you, 5 minutes is better than no minutes. So it's how we capitalize on that 5 minutes. I find things like, I call it rough housing play or rough and tumble, is a really good way to connect after separation. Often the separation is, I say we want a bookend separation. So things like if they've been at childcare and or school or whatever, we want to connect before we leave them and connect again when we come back together. So if you've got the spaciousness and the capacity to do some play, and I think things like setting a timer on the play, so saying, okay, we've got 10 minutes to play, I'm going to set the timer, that helps to sort of set a limit, and that helps to give us, I suppose, a bit of a get out clause of going, okay, I know I've only got to do this for 10 minutes and I'm going to capitalize and do as much as I can. I'm going to do an intense, give them all my focus and all my attention, and have that one-on-one really focused time for them to offload any of the stress and tension, frustration. And then when that timer goes off, then I know that, then we can sort of move on with our night. But if we don't have that 10 minutes of time, then we're going to be releasing that stress and tension and have the resistance for the whole night. So it's like, it's better to spend that sort of intensive time. It doesn't even need to be 10 minutes. It might be 5 minutes, and then it might be another 5 minutes later on. But by setting the timer, that gives them something to sort of like a boundary or a limit to push up against. So when the timer goes off, I don't want to finish play. I want to keep doing this. I don't want to, I don't want to have a bath, or I don't want to eat dinner yet, or whatever it is. But then we can say, okay, we've had a nice time playing and I'd love to play more, but we now need to. And that's going to, if there are still feelings that are bubbling there for them that haven't come out through the laughter and the play and the fun, sometimes tears or tantrums, then it's going to sort of bubble to the surface at that point once the limit's set. So then it's having the capacity to be able to hold the space when the limit has been set. So I often recommend for my parents, if you know that you've got 10 minutes in you, you might only play for 7 minutes. So then you've got the time, they're still in the bank to be able to hold the space for the feelings if the resistance is met when you set that limit and when that timer goes off.
And so when they have a meltdown after the 7 minutes, you can be there to just
acknowledge. I understand you're tired, I understand you're frustrated, or I know that you want to play more. I would love to play more too, but we now need to move into having a bath or doing homework or whatever the next thing is on the agenda. And you'll find through spending that time and doing that play and the listening, then they will become more flexible and more willing to do what we actually want to do, as opposed to every time we try and get them to do something. That often with older kids, if they've been conforming all day at childcare or at school or kindergarten or whatever, and we're there, then they get home and we're like, okay, now you're home, now you can conform and you can do what I want you to do. You've been told what to do all day. You've been told that you have to play in a sandpit, or you have to do a painting, or you have to eat lunch, or you have to sleep now, or whatever. And now I'm expecting you to come home and now, abide by my rules and follow my routine of what I need you to do. So the outcome is still the same. We still end up having the bath, or we still end up having the, dinner, or getting pajamas on, or going to bed, or whatever the next thing is in the routine. But we're not going to be met with resistance at that point, because we've released the stress and tension and enabled them to offload before we're expecting them to do the next thing.
That's great. That's really
what makes for a much calmer, a much calmer night, and it sort of avoids us having to put in things like punishments, or if you don't do this, I'm going to take that, or whatever, because those things aren't working. That's actually, giving you a further divide, or, less connection, as opposed to bringing you together. So we need to make sure that we build that connection first and the safety, and then they'll be more willing for us, to do the next thing and be more relaxed in their bodies, because they're not carrying all the emotional baggage. So how that sort of, I suppose, relates to sleep is making sure that we connect with them to provide the safety and security of the environment. So going into the room to help with the settling and, doing books or whatever it is, once we've had that chance to do the play, connecting with them to offload the accumulated feelings. If there's anything bubbling there for them, any stress and tension, by following their lead. If they're jumping on the bed or saying I need another drink or I've got to go to the toilet again or whatever, they're the signs and the invitations that they still need a little bit more. So it might be, okay, well, if you need to jump off the bed, let's do it 10 times and set a limit on it. So, okay, I'll let you do the jumping off the bed to move your body and get the, feelings out, whatever it is that's still sitting there for you. But 10 times, and then we set the limit. Okay, now back into bed. We've had our fun, and it's time to now, lie down, read a book, move on to the next thing. If we have those bubbling feelings again, then there's still stress and tension sitting there. But they're going to resist sleep until their bodies are fully relaxed. I find that physical sort of style play, the roughhousing, like I was mentioning before, that can look like in little babies, things like doing roly-poly, rolling them over, rolling them back, doing flips onto the bed, airplane rides on your feet, things like that, horsey back rides. And then in older kids, doing things like it could be, jumping on trampolines, doing handstand competitions, pillow fights, play wrestling, that sort of thing. That helps, one, with removal of stress and tension and built up, frustration or anything from their day, to help them to release their emotions through laughter, tears and tantrums. And it also has sort of like a double sword effect in that it helps them to relax their parasympathetic nervous system and relax their bodies. So if we can do that in the lead up to sleep, before we're trying to get them to calm down, we're working with their natural processes to eliminate feelings, as opposed to working against them and fighting against them, being met with resistance.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. So yes, so this, in, I suppose, unison with those other key elements, are going to sort of give you the best chance of that optimal sleep. Whereas if we go in with the accumulated feelings and have the sleep science right, we're going to be met with resistance. If we go in with, we've emptied all the emotional backpack, I like to call it, and their, well-being's good and they're all relaxing in their bodies, but we've got the timing wrong, we're going to be met with resistance, where they're going to have overtiredness or undertiredness or whatever. So it's how we sort of, I suppose, set them up for the best success, by having that holistic approach and looking behind what the behaviour is trying to tell us, and following their lead and trusting that they know what they need to do to, be as relaxed as possible in their own bodies.
Beautiful.
Yeah. This is a video of one of my mamas. She was doing a little kissing monster with her little one. So this was sort of like a nightly ritual that they did together before they started their sort of settling routine and drew blinds and all of those sorts of things. So super cute. So it's just building on that connection and bond. So this is what it can look like in, a little one. So and yeah, like I suppose I alluded to before with the holding the space, it is really, I suppose, uncovering if there is tears, what the tears are a result of. Okay, so they're often in those, especially in the younger years, and when they can't articulate the way they feel, it is often their way of expressing that a primary need needs to be met, and or an emotional need, their way of recovering from trauma. If there's physical pain, emotional pain, and how we hold that space to listen to the tears. So when I talk about listening to tears, holding space, being present, it's very different to cry it out. Okay, so if we're listening to tears in arms, showing our loving presence, empathizing, showing compassion, and yeah, just being there to listen to the tears, that's their way of releasing stress and tension from their bodies. As opposed to cry it out when they're being left alone to cry, they're actually increasing their stress hormone, cortisol, in their bodies. And usually if they've been left to cry it out, and they're, either cry it out and cry to sleep through pure exhaustion, you'll find that there's often, I find with babies that have been left to cry it out, and there's often behavioural challenges because they're carrying all that emotion and stress in their bodies. So it's even more important in those cases to be able to do that offloading, and often it takes a long time to undo that emotional baggage and all those accumulated feelings because it hasn't been done as things have been happening. So it's having that sense of trust if we are being met with resistance that they may just need to offload, but it's in our loving presence as opposed to being left alone, and setting up that sense of trust. If you need me, I will be here, and I'm here, and I'm present, and I'm listening, and I can see you.
It's a great example of that. I love how you've made that distinction with crying it out, because and showing the difference between holding space. It's almost like that saying, if you take the easy road and just ignore them and eventually they'll stop, life's going to get a lot harder, because that's going to create a maladaptive response in that child, because they have to, their survival needs are not being reinforced. And so
and that's the thing, I think they're carrying all that stress and cortisol in their bodies, so that comes out usually in sort of off-track behaviour and behavioural challenges and defiance and hitting and biting and things like that, because they're sort of they've got all that sort of baggage in their emotional backpack that hasn't been offloaded. So it's one of my sort of, I suppose, most popular questions I get: will there be crying? Because people are so frightened that they're going to have to leave their baby to cry, or they're going to have to do responsive settling or controlled crying or anything like that. So it's really, I suppose, highlighting the importance of tears are actually a good thing, in that if it's supported and in our loving presence, it's very different and very, to leaving them alone to cry. But we need to cry the same as adults. Sometimes it, feels amazing to have a really good cry and, get it out of our bodies. Sometimes you can't articulate, or you're so frustrated, or you're so angry, just tears naturally come. It's our body's natural way of releasing that sort of stress and tension and, trauma from our bodies. So we're really just acting as the vehicle to be able to help them to offload those stresses and tensions.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
That's okay.
You put the energy in at the beginning, and then it gets easier.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so, so I think another thing with the ability to be able to hold that space and do the listening and being able to support tears and tantrums is, I suppose, putting into ourselves to give us the capacity and the spaciousness to be able to do that listening. That's, again, I often have parents that are so depleted and just have nothing left to give because they're not giving to themselves. They're not sort of leaning on support networks. They're trying to do it all themselves, and they're not sort of listening to their own bodies and their own triggers and what's coming up for them as a result of having, trying to do the listening. So that's why that sort of, I suppose, the ability to gauge your own capacity in any given time is really important, and leaning on your support networks, having that sort of village of support around you. And also, self-care, little random acts of kindness from your partner or your friends, can go a long way. Just having a hot cuppa, or, getting your partner a drink of water while they're feeding, or saying, oh, can you do the settle tonight? I'm a bit tapped out, or whatever. Those little things can sort of go a long way in providing us with that spaciousness and capacity to do the listening when we need to. And also, by doing the play and having that beautiful bond and connection, it actually brings joy back to parenting. It's not that sort of, real military precision of you eat now, you sleep now, you do this now, and, you're following a routine to the ladder. And that sort of comes back to having those sort of key elements of making sure all of the puzzle pieces, I like to say, we've got to keep moving all the puzzle pieces until we get the perfect formula. So if one of those is out of alignment or in the wrong place, we're not going to be able to achieve optimal sleep. So just as important, those key elements of sleep is the self-care and the village, and, being able to have that spaciousness and capacity to show up every day. It's really, it's a tough gig. It's a roller coaster ride. And just when we think we know what we're doing, they change. Like you said at the start, if you're focused on this is where you're at and this is your routine and this is what you're learning, and they change and we stay here, then we're going to sort of have that roller coaster of, okay, now we've got to jiggle all those puzzle pieces again to get back into alignment, and then, follow them and change with them. And all the tools are the same as far as, the play and the connection and making sure that they feel safe and secure. It doesn't matter. I've got a 13-year-old and I've got, a 7-year-old, and I did the same with my, them as they were babies. But roughhousing play with the 13-year-old now will be going out and shooting hoops and getting physical with him, and, I might commentate and go, and here he comes, and he's going to come in for a massive layup, or, whatever. And it's creating the fun and the laughter, because that's when they open up, and that's when you have that deep sense of connection, and they feel safe to be able to open up, let you into their lives, tell you about what's going on at school, who the girlfriend is. They're having trouble with their schoolwork or whatever, because you've provided that sort of vehicle of openness to be able to go, you can bring it to me.
What a concept. Enjoy parenting.
Yeah. Yes, I know, that's exactly right. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve with the, the Connection Village, to try and, bring the joy back, bring connection together, make parents feel empowered and in sort of, I suppose, in control of their journey and what feels right for them, because we can't sort of go with, this, it's not black or white, it's somewhere in grey. So if we're trying to do something that doesn't sit well with us, or we're going against our natural sort of style, or, often parents' styles are very different because they've been raised differently, and then they're trying to raise a human together, and one thinks this is the way and one thinks that's the way. So it's sort of having that alignment and, what feels right for you and your family, and how you can sort of establish that.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Just
some final questions, Shae. I'd like to just ask you some final questions about what are some of the real common issues that you tend to deal with? Let's start with babies, but also older children as well.
So in the younger sort of, I suppose, newborn to 6 months, it's often things like catnapping, early rising. I think sometimes the unrealistic expectation that babies should be able to self-settle, should be able to sleep overnight, don't need to be fed, that sort of thing. So I think it's really, I suppose, for me, around education and support in what realistic expectations are, watching their baby, what their baby's trying to tell them, looking behind behaviour, supporting development, that sort of thing. And also, like we were talking about with the routines and wake windows and things like that, actually watching what their baby's doing, where they're at on their journey, and not comparing to others. That's probably, I suppose, in that sort of 0 to 6 months. And then post that, in the sort of second 6 months up to 1, it's usually more things of like dropping naps. Often parents are going back to work, potentially transitioning to childcare or other carers, grandparents trying to help out, things like that, and how that sort of changes the dynamics again around the connection and the capacity to be able to do the play and work and be up in the night and all of those sorts of things. And then I think it leads more into, clients often come because of a sleep challenge, but when you sort of delve a little bit deeper with the older ones, it's usually there's emotional baggage, a lack of connection, things like developmental progressions, say starting to walk, transitioning to bed, potentially starting, like kinder and things like that. The impact that has on the child and the transition, and how that sort of upsets the routine, and what we need to do either end, like I was talking about with the book ending with connection, if you are separated for a period of time. But yeah, probably the developmental milestones and transitions is probably the biggest one. And then your behavioural challenges, things like separation anxieties, and then going into things like toilet training, or sometimes I have people with, when they are trying to drop naps and things like that, early rising and things like that in the older ones as well. But it becomes more sort of an emotional regulation and that building of the connection more so than the sleep science in those sort of later years.
It just shows you, listening to you go through sort of all the different phases and stages that parents go through, and it can be a bit of a shock in terms of having to continuously attune and respond and read their babies, and then navigate that with their own personal needs of trying to run a house and potentially a job or career, and putting all of that together. It's quite a thing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, always this is not about perfection, but what you and a lot of the other people have said in the summit really boils down to our capacity to attune and to connect to our children. And the more we can do that proactively, the more we can make those changes and adjust to those different transitions that we're going through. But as parents, we're human. We are often dealing with our own sort of historical programming from when we were raised, and the subconscious things that can come out. And it's a very ripe and fertile time for parents doing the work on themselves to identify what is it about when my child triggers me like this, what's this communicating about me and my inner world as well.
It's very much a journey of self-discovery. I think when a child is born, a parent is born, and we go on our own journey, and it's how we what we need to do to manage and show up every day, having that sort of support, the self-care, the being attuned with what feels right. Often people are sort of parenting outside of their natural style, trusting your instincts and your intuition, and just building on that sort of the connections and the bond to provide that safety and security. And I think if you sort of have the willingness and openness to trust and follow your child's lead and sort of move along the journey with them, rather than sort of having your own outcomes or your own plan in mind. Because if we sort of have a set plan that doesn't go to the plan, that's when we sort of get met with the overwhelm and the anxiety, and the parenting starts to get on top of us. So it's how we sort of rebalance and reconnect with ourselves, and what's that showing us about ourselves, to do the work on ourselves so we can sort of show up and be the best parents we can be. And just knowing everything, you work the best you can with the tools that you've got, and you are enough, and you're doing an awesome job to raise these beautiful little humans.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work you're doing. I love knowing that parents have the ability to just have some time with someone who can help guide them, not just to the symptom, but to the deeper forces behind children's behaviours and the challenges that they have. So thank you once again, Shae, for being a part of our community and sharing your wonderful, rich wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you. We'll talk again.